Hello, my name is Rebecca Nicole Guerrero. I am an English language arts facilitator at the Young Women's STEAM Research and Preparatory Academy in El Paso, Texas. And today I'm going to be talking about a project that we did at the beginning of the year, which was called Overcoming Violence. And this is a project that I did with my 8th grade students. So the authentic real-world project scenario for this particular project was a pretty painful one. Just before starting school this summer, El Paso, Texas experienced an act of domestic terrorism. A white supremacist entered a local Walmart and opened fire, killing 22 civilians. And it's hard to explain how profoundly this act impacted El Paso, Texas, and how much we were devastated by it. This Walmart, there's probably not a single El Pasoan who has not been to this Walmart. It's the busiest one. It's the most popular one with international shoppers from Juarez. It's sort of this central hub of the community. And for something like this to happen there was this definite sense that it could have been anyone in our community who was affected by it. When it first happened, my first thoughts were of my students, immediately wondering if any of them were there, and thank God they weren't. But then next I thought about, how are we going to tackle this in school? And how am I going to be prepared to answer the questions that they are undoubtedly going to have, all the anger, all of the confusion, and how am I as a teacher going to use whatever tools that I have to help them understand something so inexplicable? And so my tools are my books, and so I scrapped the first project that I had planned for the year. I knew that we couldn't start on that note. We were going to need to make some time and some space to talk about this. And I knew that I would need to create something to help them understand trauma and violence, and even racism and resilience and survival. And so I designed a project using the Diary of Anne Frank as the anchor text. And that seemed like a no-brainer because the diary touches on all of those themes previously mentioned. And it's a 13-year-old girl who's trying to deal with unimaginable horror. And that's what I knew my students were going to need at that moment. So there were a lot of ways that I could have gone with the project, but I decided to focus on action that can be taken after trauma to help with healing. So the buzz around creating a memorial started very quickly after the event. And so my driving question, and our driving question was, what role does memorializing play in healing, reflection, and social change after community trauma? So I knew that I wanted my students to not only process what had happened, but then use their knowledge to try and make a difference, to try and make something positive come out of something so negative. So the project took on 2 different strains, each linked to power standards. Firstly, we would use our literary analysis of the Diary of Anne Frank and the genre conventions of narrative writing to come to terms with our own feelings about the event and learn how to express them through writing. So a local bookstore called Brave Books put out a student writing invitational after the event, inviting students on both sides of the border to submit written pieces processing the tragedy, and they called it the Frontera Rising Project. My students responded to that call by using Anne Frank as a guide to writing personal narratives about their experience on the day of the shooting. There was an alternate narrative writing assignment for those students who didn't feel like they could tackle it. And we as a school decided that we were not going to make them talk about something that they may not be ready to, but for many of them, they were definitely ready to, and they had a lot of strong things to say. So the students who did feel compelled to write about it, they submitted their work to Brave Books, and then 8 students were chosen to come down to the bookstore and do oral readings of their narratives, which were shared via the store's social media to El Paso community members and just to the larger El Paso community. And this was a huge moment for students because they felt that their voice and interpretation mattered and they were being heard. Their thoughts about the events were being heard. The other major component was a group design of a potential memorial to the 22 victims. So the power standards involved in that component were learning argumentative writing skills and conventions and applying them in written work, and then also using graphical elements and expository text to help explain features, as well as understanding what symbolism is and the way it impacts meaning, whether that be through writing or even in a piece of public art. So after researching existing Holocaust memorials and analyzing their symbolism and design, students were visited by a director of the Museum and Cultural Affairs Department here in El Paso. And she talked to them about the process of selecting and implementing public art and all the considerations that go into it. She talked to them about art proposals and how artists need to be ready to pitch their design in a persuasive and comprehensive way, talking budget, rationale, and design. And from there, students got to work designing their memorials on Tinkercad and Minecraft and sketches. And additionally, they created written proposals, writing within the genre of argumentative writing and text, and addressing all the areas MCAD, the Museum and Cultural Affairs Department, had instructed them to look at. Finally, each class had one standout design and proposal selected to pitch to an art panel from MCAD, and they got to hear that. All products involved in this project required specific content knowledge in order to be high quality enough to share with the community. They had to follow genre-specific written conventions and be persuasive, and they had to design a memorial that was well explained and contained relevant symbolism and showed an understanding of the role memorials can play in healing. Learning outcomes that were developed were all major areas: written communication through the proposals, knowledge and thinking through the analysis of symbolism, oral communication when the teams presented their pitches to MCAD, and definitely agency, because students just understood the gravity of of the task that they were undertaking, and they didn't take it lightly. The memorial students created, they had to be rationalized within the proposal, and that's how we went back to our driving question of what role can memorials play in healing after trauma. Students explained what types of outcomes they hoped their memorials would have in the community. So some were spaces of peaceful reflection. Others were spaces that held a strong message of bicultural unity. Others were expressions of community pride. And students used Holocaust memorials that were designed around that tragedy in order to reflect on all the different things a memorial can be and do. One of the most impactful parts was definitely the presentation to MCAD. Students got to present their work to a real panel from the city, and they learned about how rationalized and justified their designs had to be. So the panel definitely praised their creativity, but they also let them know when, hey, your budget is a little bit off here. Have you rationalized this? Have you thought about this? And just they saw how really well planned out things have to be in order to be pitched to the community. So that's something that they told me will stay with them, how scary it is to actually have your work being presented in front of people who know what they're doing and what they're talking about. So that was a huge impact on student learning that it had. Rubrics. So we used two rubrics. First of all, the written communication rubric for 8th grade from New Tech. That rubric was used for both their narrative pieces for Frontera Rising and also their the proposal. So thinking about controlling idea, organizational structure, explanation of background. And then the rubric that I created for the digital rendering was used throughout their process as well, before design, during Critical Friends, and also it was the rubric that they knew I and my fellow facilitators would use in order to select the presentations that were going to move on to the panel. So that's an overview of our Overcoming Violence project. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.